So today's workshop is called Beyond Sex Positivity, Exploring Sexuality, Spirituality, and Creativity. And I'm so excited to introduce our two facilitators and hosts today of this workshop. And before I do, I'm just going to just share quickly about Shuva Center. So Shuva Center is a Jewish recovery program and community that's based in New York City. And they bring together, we bring together Jewish wisdom and text, recovery, addiction recovery frameworks and program, as well as spiritual counseling. We bring all of this together into a space to help people live into their best selves and to heal from the suffering of addiction. And so I'll tell you a little bit about Rabbi Iggy here and Jessica Graham. So Rabbi Iggy is founder of Shuva Center, and he is a renowned Talmud teacher, spiritual counselor, artist, and educator. He grew up between Belgium and Israel, and he, he grew up in a traditional Jewish Orthodox home. He is author, speaker, teacher, and a contributor on subjects ranging from Talmud, Jewish text, spirituality, addiction, recovery, fatherhood, and queer identity issues. So he's now founder of Shuva Center, and he formerly was director of spiritual counseling at Beit Shuva in Los Angeles. And then we also have Jessica Graham. We're so excited to have you on today with us for this participatory workshop. Jessica Graham is a meditation teacher. She is a sex and relationship spiritual coach for couples and individuals. And she's a speaker and an author. She recently wrote the book, Good Sex, Getting Off Without Checking Out. And she's also a contributing editor of a meditation blog called Deconstructing Yourself. And she's also an award-winning actor and filmmaker. You can find more information about her work at www.yourwildawakening.com, and she'll share more about how you can explore her work and her support at the end of this workshop. So please stay for the full session so you can find out more about that. And with that, I will just say, as we engage in this participatory workshop, which will go until 8:15 Eastern, and so as we go through this workshop, please practice mindful listening. If you do decide to share in the chat and engage, whether you ask questions or share insights, please just keep the focus on yourself when sharing and engaging. And also just please be mindful to be kind and respectful in the chat. And also we do invite you to ask all the questions that you have and share your insights, share your reports throughout this workshop. There will be some exercises for you to participate in. So we would love to hear from you in the chat. And Rabbi Iggy and Jessica will field as many questions and reports throughout the workshop as time permits. So you will be able to receive some guidance today and some insight from them. And with that, I'm so excited to hand this over to Rabbi Iggy and Jessica Graham.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you for joining us. Everybody who is going through this, no, Jason, we're going to 9:15, so we're going for about 75 minutes. So it's not just 15 minutes. Hello, everybody who's joining us from Pasadena and Lancaster, New York, and Brooklyn and Vegas and Arizona, Jersey. It's really nice to see everybody, right? So like, hi from Germany. Hello, Isabel. Very nice to sort of see. So right here we are, and I think sort of one of the amazing gifts with sort of this sort of technology and perhaps a little bit of a gift of Corona, so that we get to talk across country now, clearly cross-continental. And really, I'm very excited about sort of this topic because I think definitely as it relates to recovery, but I think as it relates to spirituality, it has a very common element, which is things that people don't really talk about.
Yep.
Right?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's one of the main ones, and it's amazing, like how little we talk about the thing that is actually what allows us to be here. Like, the thing that created us, at least most of us, you know. I mean, there's newfangled ways of creating babies, but they still come from the same parts of the body that involve sex. So, you know, it's kind of especially in terms of spirituality, like when we're looking to awaken, when we're looking to really shine the light of awareness on being human, to leave this part out, it's unfortunate. So I'm super excited to be able to be having these kinds of conversations with people like you.
Right. And yeah, I mean, I think, right, sort of also the, I think for a lot of people, some of the unexpected sort of, right, rabbis don't talk about these things, right? We don't talk about sex, right? We don't talk about sex in public. We don't talk about sex in general. And I think one of the things sort of to mention, right, is we call it, like, when we talk about it, decided to call it beyond sex positivity, right? To not just be sex positive, that is, right, so like to allow people to be okay with their sex and their sexuality, but to move a little bit beyond that, right?
Yeah.
To, I think, to find, or to help people find some more meaning behind, right, the sex. Because I think, right, even if people like, okay, yes, right, I'm okay with talking about sex or talk about sexuality, even if, yes, I acknowledge that that's how we're all created, but let's leave it at that, right? So both you and I are interested in sort of like, but what does that mean? How is that related to your creativity? How is that related to your intimacy, both with yourself and with others, right? How does that, in my book, right, so like this, the conversation or the language of the soul, right, has to have more than just words.
Mm.
And in that sense, right, so like how actions, our sensations, our bodies, our very selves, is about that. And into that of the creativity. How do we express ourselves?
Absolutely. I mean, definitely when we're shut down sexually or repressing ourselves sexually or have a lot of unconsciousness around our sexuality, it tends to also move over into the creative realm as well, and vice versa. You know, if you think about when you're like really in love, like you're falling in love, you got all those love chemicals going, all the love drugs happening, all the lust and the attraction and all of that. It's like, it feels like whether you're writing good songs or not, it feels like you could write like the best love song, the most amazing poem. You could paint like the most gorgeous landscape because you have all this energy moving through you that is actually creative energy. And I think, you know, that's actually something that we can harness and channel and be in connection with, even if we choose to be celibate.
Right.
Right? It's something that's ours. It's our birthright.
Right. And I think for many people, especially if you're celibate, right? I mean, I think, right, if you're with somebody else, it's so easy to get lost in that, right? Because you get lost in sort of the lust, you get lost in the other person, right? So like everything's possible, right? So right? So this phase, you fall in love, and right, so like everything's cute, right? Oh my God, you have the cutest knees. Like, oh my God, you have earwax. Oh my God, I love earwax, right? Sort of like, right, sort of right. Later on, of course, if you're long married, it's sort of like, stop sneezing. Sort of like, right? Oh my God, just clean your ears. We'll kill you to kill your ears. But I think in that sense, getting lost in somebody else has to do with sort of falling in love and falling in lust, right? Sort of.
Yeah. And you know what I would say is like, that's a very beginning place where you can start to bring spiritual practice and awakening and clarity and consciousness into sex is in that moment, is in those moments or those weeks or months or whatever it is of the chemicals, of the attraction, right? Like we have this cultural agreement that we can just kind of go a little insane, like a little bit like off the rails when we're in love. You know, we can, you know, be on the freeway texting the object of desire, like totally like risking our lives and others. We can like be staying up all night and getting sick because we're not getting enough sleep and then going to work, you know, and we can kind of get checked out and lost in that experience. But what if right there from the gate, from the moment that you see that person across the room or on Tinder or whatever it is, you're bringing a sense of wakefulness, of mindfulness, of presence into your experience, like slowing down and saying, well, what does it feel like to have that rush of chemicals move through my body? what is it like to have this thought moving through, to be thinking about, are they going to text me back? Are they going to text me back? What is it like to observe that? So you can be starting already to bring in this deeper experience of sexuality, of sex, of relationship from the very beginning.
Right. But and I think the part of what we're talking about today is the reason why so many people do not do that. Right. I think that so many people, right, have challenges around this, right? Sort of facing themselves around sexuality, around spirituality, around creativity. But right, to come back to your example, that weight, right? The ellipsis, right? That weight between like, will they text back? What will they text back? Right? Is excruciating, right? Because we confuse our self-worth with that, right? So like you and I talked about this sort of on the podcast, right? For everybody, right, in Tattoos and Torah, but really sort of this conversation on getting lost in somebody else because one's self-worth is so much tied to this, right? And people say, when somebody says to you, wow, you're so hot, wow, you're sexy, I want to have sex with you, right? Let's do that, like they're playful. Many people unfortunately don't hear it that way. Many people hear it like, oh, you have value, right? You matter, even, right? I love you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Toxicity of that.
Yeah, you're good enough. It's we're playing out our, you know, our oldest, deepest wounds in these moments. And you know, this is the reason why it's a place we can get lost and we can be unconscious. And it's also a reason, you know, that we don't want to get really, really present with it, because when we get really present, for most people in the beginning of the process, when you get really present with sex and sexuality and, you know, even your body in a sensual way, you come in contact with pain, you come in contact with suffering, you come in contact with anxiety and with shame and for many, many people with trauma. And so because so many of us are experiencing that, you know, we kind of just create a collective of people who are not, we're not going to go there. We're going to kind of check out in it. We're going to kind of get lost in it, but only to a certain point. And then it's like, we're not actually going to go beneath that. We're not going to look under the hood because it's too painful, which is totally understandable. Being someone that comes from a history of trauma, like I didn't want to look in there. I wanted to have fun. I wanted to have crazy sex. I wanted to, you know, involve a lot of drugs and alcohol with it because that could help me stay certain amount checked out. But I didn't want to really look at it, and I didn't want to really be seen in that way either, or see another person, because it was just too painful. And so for me, it did take tools and it took a lot of work to come to a place where I was ready. And so when someone comes to me and they say, okay, I want to, you know, do some work around my sexuality, you know, 9 times out of 10, we end up doing other work first. We're not just diving right into sex. There's like all this stuff that comes with it.
So so for people who like, how did you come to become the woman that you are? Right? I mean, my Diane von Fonstenberg constantly asked, like, are you the woman that you've always wanted to be? Right? Like, which is an interesting question always. But I'm like, I'm not a woman, Diane, shut up. But like, but right, how, right, because you just mentioned, right, so like your own trauma, and I think for a lot of people, like, well, I can't get to be there, I have this trauma, or I'm ashamed of my body, or like, right, my story makes me feel that, right, sex is dirty or horrible, or like, right, so like people who are crazy sexy are sort of like a combination of witches, sluts, and right, and sort of like immoral women or immoral men, right? And so why would I want to be there? Why would I want to get there? Right? And how, I don't even know that I can if I wanted to.
Yeah, well, it can seem like it's many, many, many oceans away. That being in connection with our authentic sexuality is so far away. And I think oftentimes the biggest thing that's standing in the way is the idea of how we think it's supposed to look based on what we see, based on our idea of what being sexually open or sexually empowered looks like. And so a big part of the journey is like, what is it like to just come in contact with me, with my expression of sexuality at this time. I want to answer your question and talk a little bit about my story, and I want to hear about yours too. I'd love, if it's all right, to take a few minutes just to kind of have everyone check in and just get into a space of feeling resourced, because talking about sex is not, like we already stated, it's not something that we do. And so for you and I, like, we could sit around and we could just talk about this all day, right? Like, it's like very comfortable. But even though people signed up for this and they came here because they wanted to be involved in this conversation, there still might be some reaction happening for some of you right now. And so I just want to invite everyone to just take a moment, and you can have your eyes open or closed, whatever feels good. And to just first start with just noticing how you're feeling in this moment and letting that be invited into this space and into this time together. You know, how does the body feel? What's happening in the mind? And just getting present and really not trying to get to some certain space. Like, just because I'm a meditation teacher and I'm sort of giving some meditative type prompts doesn't mean you need to like get into some special space of perfect, you know, peace and acceptance. Instead, just be where you are and just notice how you feel. And then I want to invite you to move your attention towards something that feels good, pleasurable, grounded, safe, or even just neutral in your body. And so that could be the feeling of your feet on the ground. It could be your hands in your lap. It could be your breath. It could be like the feeling of your butt on the seat, or anything else in the body that really just feels okay. And we'll call this resource, and this is borrowed from Peter Levine's somatic experiencing. The idea is that you know, there might be other things happening, there might be overwhelming experiences in the body, but that we're giving ourselves this resource so that can process. And so go ahead and do it. If you haven't tried it yet, go ahead and just find that place. Tune into it. Be with it for a moment. And then I want to encourage you, as we move through the session, anytime you feel overwhelmed, or maybe you feel annoyed, or maybe you feel a little like your brain is freezing a little bit, or maybe you're like, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm going to go do something else, or I need to check my email. You start to have like a feeling like that. I want you to tune in to some resource. And then tune into resource anytime as well. Just let that be part of the experience today, knowing that we're all here doing that together. So thanks.
I love that, because I think it's important, right? So spiritually speaking, to identify the anchor, right? So to say like, okay, so this is kind of like create a baseline for us, for all of us. And definitely, I think you're right? Whenever we talk about these things, there's a lot of like, either people are like, oh, Mama, tell me more, or people are like, this feels like, you know, who else is hearing this, or, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. And even in the tell me more, sometimes there can be a pushing through.
Right.
Like when I'm first talking with someone and they start to want to tell me everything, it's not that I don't want to hear it, but we're so used to, especially when it comes to sex, we're so used to pushing through. We're not really used to being in radical consent with ourselves when it comes to sharing this. And so what's that?
And ignoring ourselves, right? So
exactly. Like, yeah, exactly. I mean, I can't tell you how much sex I had in my life that, like, it's not like I didn't want to do it, but I didn't really want to either. Like, I was kind of just pushing through, maybe pushing through pain, maybe pushing through like, you know, just boredom, or pushing through like nausea because I drank too much or whatever it was, you know, and like not really fully wanting to be there. So when we talk about sex, it's a time where we can practice that kind of connection and consent with ourselves. Yeah. So you were asking me how, you know, how I became the woman I am, and am I the woman I want to be? You know, like, just to lead with vulnerability and just start like from where I am today. It's like, today I have a lot of brain fog. I deal with chronic illness. And so like, I'm like working with like some symptoms today, and I'm aware of that. And it's very interesting because when I, you know, I've been interested and into talking about sex since I was a kid, but, when it became my job, very shortly after, I started just getting, dealing with chronic illness at a much more, you know, more serious level. And so, a lot of pain. And it's just been so interesting to have that be like part of the experience of like talking about this thing that that I associate it with like pleasure and freedom and spaciousness, and to be like, okay, it's like, what does that look like when I'm dealing with a body that's not quite what it used to be? And so that's where I am today. Like today I'm navigating like, okay, how to bring all of this in, right? Like the spiritual practice side of things makes a lot of sense with this, but I'm still discovering, I'm still in a process of discovering like, what does my sexuality look like as someone who deals with chronic pain and fatigue and all of that. And so that's kind of my edge. That's where I am right now. Like to re-engage with that part of myself, to rediscover that part of myself while really allowing for these developments.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think it's important. It's something I didn't want to talk about when it first started happening, because I was like, I don't want people to think I'm sick. Like I want to be like, you know, but that, as we all know, or, you know, we will come to know, like that doesn't, like, it doesn't help. It doesn't help pushing that stuff down and keeping it secret.
No, absolutely. Right. Vulnerability is the key to our connection.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
And we're all dealing with something, right? So like nobody's, right. Yeah. I mean, I'll get to my story in a bit, but you know, same thing, right? I'm not as young as I used to be, right? And sort of not everything functions properly, right? Sort of not everything sort of like, you know, I'd like to go for like a really big walk, but I can't. Right?
Yeah, right.
I mean, I can. It's just tomorrow I won't be able to sit down. So like
pros and cons, I suppose, right? Yeah. So for me, like I said, you know, I was interested in sex from a very young age, and some of that was just the way that I came out, and some of that had to do with, you know, trauma and, you know, kind of over sexualization and all of that. But ultimately, like, it's definitely a part of me, and it's something I'm comfortable talking about. So it just became part of my life. And as a teenager, I was kind of like the go-to person, like, you know, if you got pregnant and you had to figure out what state you could get an abortion in, or if you, you know, wanted to know how to give a blowjob, you could come to me and I would help you. And so I was sort of like this like teenage sex coach. I don't know if you've seen Sex Education on Netflix.
Yes. As you started talking, I was thinking about Maeve as well. I was like, you know.
Yeah, I was watching it. I was like, I did this. I didn't get paid, but I did this. This was me. But I also, you know, I was on my own young, and you know, my sexuality, while there was a lot of fun and freedom in it, there was also, you know, dysfunction and, you know, unhealthy sort of behaviors within it, compulsive behaviors within it. And so in my late 20s, I got sober. And that obviously changed a lot because I no longer had the option to check out in that way. So I had to start to really like look at myself. And for me, a lot of the consequences when it came to drugs and alcohol were related to sex, and were related to relationship. And so that's where a lot of like the wreckage was for me. So it was really a time for me to start to like, clean that up and come to a new place. And in the same period of time, I started meditating, and I had a very, some really just big radical shifts, paradigm shifts pretty quickly with the meditation I was doing, where it was just like everything was different. Like it was like I was in the matrix, and then I was like, oh, there's a matrix. Like I had that sort of experience. And so eventually I was ready to start really re-engaging with my sexual self. And I thought, well, why not bring this whole mindfulness sort of spiritual path thing into sex? And you know, I didn't really have a willing partner at the time, and so did it with myself. You know, I did my own solo sexual exploration, you know, and eventually, you know, left that relationship and moved on to one where I could express that part of myself. And,
you break up with yourself, like, you know what? I'm done with you.
No, I kept dating myself. I stopped dating the person that didn't want to engage with me in that way.
I got it.
I had a partner, just not necessarily not willing. Yeah. No, I definitely kept me. And so it was like I started teaching meditation, and I started writing about meditation, and nobody at that time, there's more of it now, but there were not meditation teachers talking about sex at that time that I was coming across that weren't of some specific like tantric sex or orgasmic meditation. There wasn't just like mindfulness meditation. Let's talk about orgasms, let's talk about sex. So I started to do it myself because couldn't find it anywhere, and I started writing about it and talking about it, and then it was just clearly needed, and so there was a big response, and so it kind of, one thing led to another, and ended up writing a book. And of course, when we teach and when we really go into this stuff, it's going to change how we relate to it as well. And so from the beginning of the journey to now, like, the way that my sexuality expresses has been through many, many variations. But the one thing I would say is the common thread is self-love and healing of trauma and connection, like continuing to be vulnerable, right? Like, this has been these have been the threads that have moved through all of it. And I've been so lucky to be humbled again and again, like, so lucky to have the opportunity to realize, oh, I know nothing. I know nothing. Okay. Oh, I get to start here. Okay, cool.
I get to learn more.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, so addiction and trauma and a lot of suffering and a lot of fun, and then healing and rediscovery and a lot of fun. It's been a journey, and it's a real honor to be able to take my experiences and be able to offer some support to other people around that, and an area that creates so much suffering for folks. So yeah. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, but I find that so fascinating about what you're saying, right? Because I think so many people do have trauma, and they think that because it is either of sexual nature or that it affects their sex life, that they will never be able to heal from it, right? That they will never be, because they, like we said, there's nobody to talk to about it. There's nobody to really express yourself about it. It's too painful. It's too raw, or nobody gets it, right? So like this sort of like, right? So like it kind of isolates us, and also the shame, right? We're like, I don't want to talk about it, right? And all the different elements that it brings, right? So like fetish, kink, right? So like all the different elements that we have, where people feel judged by themselves and by society, even without telling anybody, right? So like,
Yeah.
and we'll talk about it in a bit. Yeah, it's funny. So of course, I grew up in a very repressed sort of society, right? I grew up ultra orthodox, and right, and sex was really a procreational thing, right? This is what sort of, right? And because we were always secluded into sort of boys and girls, right? So like sort of that sort of girls were distractions, girls were, right, sort of things, sort of, I mean, haha, the joke was on them in the end, but right, because I wasn't quite distracted by the girls. But I really sort of, I thought that that's how it is. It's funny, we kind of got like sort of these cross points, right? It was only when I was much older and I started sort of like really reading about others' ideas around sex and traveling the world and seeing statues. But I remember in Japan, they have these little ivory sort of like weights called netsuke. And the netsuke are these sort of like weights for the pouches of sort of that you hang on your belt for money or for other things, these kind of counterweights. And they're usually carved out of like ivory or bone or something else. And there's netsuke, and you can see like the usual traditional sort of motifs, but every once in a while, the really expensive ones like open up. And in it is usually a very erotic scene, right? Sort of like, and very, I think, influenced by Tantra and all that. And I remember sort of thinking, like, oh, it's more than that, right? And later on, so like I said, I used sex as validation, right? I use sex to not be alone. I use sex to conquer. I used sex to feel important, right? I used sex to feel that I do something better than most, right? It was important for me to be good at it, right? I mean, I know I'm such a boy, but like, but it's
no,
like,
I relate.
yeah, right.
Same
So
here.
like,
Yeah.
but it was important for me to be good at it, and I lost myself in it for a long time because I thought that that's what you're supposed to do, right? For me, right, like sex positivity, and later on, like that was part of the liberation, but also because I was I'm a product of sort of, right, so like I grew up in the 80s, right? I came into sexual maturity in the 80s, right? So like sex for me was always a risk of death, right? With AIDS going around, especially with sort of like within the gay community, right? So like AIDS going around, and you see the pictures and right and the movies, like, right. So sex always came with a risk. Sex was always this Russian roulette kind of a thing. And those two were really very destructive for me for a while. Because, right, so like on one hand, yes, I would get off. On the other hand, it was always an anxiety, a fear, a rage that was always involved in it. It was only when I discovered, like you, sort of both sort of texts and readings and meditation, that I realized sort of that energy is just that, and how I channel it becomes something much more important. And we'll talk about, we'll want to do some exercises in a little bit for everyone, right? But that idea, right? I've said, I think to you before, right before, is sort of like that I believe now that you're either fucking your job or you're fucking your partner, but you got to be fucking something. But you gotta put your energy somewhere in this, right? And if you do, then you're able to channel a lot of it. But if you don't, it becomes very repressive and very toxic because it doesn't have any. And this is where the spirituality and recovery and creativity come. Right, sort of like you, right, sort of creating something new requires those elements, right? And we're not even touching about sort of like a mystical Judaism of male and female, like, right? So like we're just talking about like the base human condition.
Yeah.
I don't know, by the way, if people who are listening to us, if you have questions, right, put it in the chat, interact, tell us how you feel, tell us what you think, you know, feel free to be, you know, as open as you choose to be, right? Your comments are never recorded, so, you know, you're full anonymity in that sense. But if you have any questions for Jessica or for me, or just comments, please interact with us. That'll be very cool.
Can I ask you a question?
Of course, you are invited to.
So, do you remember what it was like as you shifted into a different expression of your sexuality? Like, do you remember being like, oh, wow, this is really different?
Yes, absolutely. I, in fact, remember having sex with somebody, this was many years ago, and I remember sort of shifting that and breathing into it, and I remember sort of looking into their eyes, right? I remember sort of like in sort of breathing, and I remember our breath being synchronized all of a sudden, right? So like all of a sudden, so we were breathing the same thing, and while we were kissing, for example, the breaths went in and out, and I remember this warm feeling inside that completely satisfied me. All of a sudden, sort of like coming or finishing, whatever, was not the thing that was important.
Yeah.
My connection to that person was far more satisfying in that moment. I feel like if I don't get anything else, I'm good. This feels really good for me.
So beautifully put. And the amazing thing is that really is available to all of us. And there's, you know, there can be work to do, and there can be varying degrees of work depending on what you have going on, but that's available to all of us, that kind of union.
Absolutely. And it's not even hard.
Right.
Like, right? It's not even hard, right? All you need to do is listen to us to the end of the end with it. Right. So there's just a couple comments. One, I'm excited to hear about how channel sexuality towards my creative work. I've explored pleasure using unified mindfulness, feel good techniques, but that's the extent of it for me. So we'll talk definitely about that. Then there's a question: how do you guys think apps, Tinder, Grindr, etc., have contributed to or become detrimental towards healthy, sex positive sex positivity? That's a very important question. So let's talk about that first. What do you think, Jessica?
Well, I mean, I think with anything, right? Like, for example, social media. I've had an amazing experience of social media pretty much across the board. Okay. Like, for example, sitting here with you, I feel such a kindred connection.
Yes.
That is via social media. Like that's,
Right.
and I know we have a mutual person, but that mutual person, it's like Jessica and I stayed in contact because of social media, right? Like, so I've had a really awesome experience of social media. And then I know people who have had horrible experiences, negative, addictive, awful experiences. It's about how are we choosing to engage with this medium? And I've been really intentional about how I engage with it. I can't say I do it perfectly, but I engage with a lot of intentionality. So when it comes to the dating apps, it kind of comes down to that. Is it something that's helping us check out? Is it something that's having us compare ourselves and put ourselves down? Is it something that's making us feel, more judgmental and more disconnected? Or are we using it in an intentional, mindful way? And if we are, then, I mean, look, I have a couple friends who are going to be lifelong friends who I met through dating apps, and people I had maybe short term or every once in a while sexual relationships with, who have now become like people in my heart, and because I engaged with it in that way. So it's about how you're engaging with it. And I would say, yeah, probably majority of people are not engaging with it that way. So it's more of an addictive, it's more of a dopamine hit. It's swipe, ding, 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 ding. And that's where, bringing your spiritual practice, bringing mindfulness into it is what it's all about. And also it's an opportunity to get really clear and intentional about what you actually want. So when I'm coaching someone around creating an online profile for a dating app, it's like, what do you actually want?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you get to put that out there, and you get to express that through the way that you introduce yourself as well. So it can be really powerful in that way. Obviously, lots of negative things I could say about it, but I'll leave it at that.
Right. No, I agree 100%. I mean, I tell clients sometimes that sort of one way of doing it is set times. Don't pick it up out of boredom. Don't pick it up because you want self-soothe. Don't pick it up when you're going into bed. Set, right? I'm looking at between 8 and 9 and between 6 and 7, right? Be intentional about it, right?
Yep.
Secondly, like you said, is what do you want? And that is hard because you have to be honest. You have to be honest. If you just want to hook up, you have to be honest. So yes, but I will seem shallow. You may or may not, but you will attract the people that you want. And then you'll be a lot happier. Because if you have to pretend to date somebody and all you want is a hookup, you will have resentments around it, and you will take it out on yourself and him or her. And then lastly, I would say, and that's just the part about not just the mindfulness, but you also get to decide how you want to be on these things, and not hide behind anonymity, and not hide behind, right? So like the fact that you may never meet this person, right? And be kind and compassionate. Right? This is really the place for you to experience yourself as kind and compassionate, because you'll get hit by people who say like, hey, how's it going? Or like, and things, or you're like, you're really cute or whatever. And you can ignore them and pretend there's no person on the other side. Or you can say very clearly, hi, thank you for reaching out. You're not for me, or whatever. It's not a match, or whatever it is. And you get to go to bed feeling that you've done your part in this world, right? And this is really where spirituality and mindfulness come in.
Mm-hmm. And what do they say? Like, esteemable acts build self-esteem. So you're building character, building self-esteem each time you have an interaction like that. And I wanted to go back to what you said about the hookup thing. I so agree. Like, be honest. What are you looking for? And just because you're looking for a hookup doesn't mean you can't have one of those beautiful spiritual experiences, right? Like, you can still be very connected and very intimate with someone for a very short time period, and you can express that with the energy from which you come from when you create your profile as well. Like, if you're wanting to explore deeper layers of what sexuality can be in a one night stand sort of situation, you can. It's just about being intentional about it.
Absolutely. And like, right. And I mean, I just, in one of the podcasts, right, about love, I talk about, right, right, so the Greeks said 7 words for love, right? And one of them is eros. And eros, right, is that playful, right, flirty, going to the bar, looks across the room, flirty, kind of touching the hand, a night of dancing, right? Sort of like, right, I describe in LA, me and my friends used to go to El Floridita, which is this Cuban restaurant up in Hollywood that every once in a while had these like live salsa bands. And it's like loud and things, and you go, right, and you meet people and you dance, and it's super flirty, and that's fun. But you have to know, right, that you can have a full relationship within that full hour, right? But that's what it is, and you have to be open about it, and absolutely, and the comment just said, right, so like I left things and things. I was afraid of not getting any interest, and I was trying to appear as wide a pool as possible, but that just attracted the misaligned people. That's right, because I didn't communicate my needs. And you have to know your needs, right? And we'll talk about that in a second as well. And there was another comment, the 70s and the 80s were another world, so free and so easy, not even worrying about condoms. The women were using contraception until AIDS consideration arose. Yes and no. I mean, again, right? So like I think, right, sort of like, yes, that's true, but that spirit can still live on. It just requires us to be a lot more intentional.
Yeah.
Right? A lot more intentional, right?
Absolutely. You can have free, fun, crazy, wild love and at the same time be taking care of yourself and your partners. Absolutely. Right. I mean, I grew up, I grew up during that. So it's like while, I'm a woman, I'm not a gay man. It was different for me. I was definitely like, my parents were talking about it with me from the beginning. I was just a little kid. It was like, I learned that and I'm glad that I'm able to, that I was raised in such a way where I can talk really clearly about that stuff and actually request to see STI results, and share mine. Like that's okay to do, by the way, just so people know.
Well, hey, it's funny because right within the gay community, right? So like most people know each other's medical records before they know their names. I mean, right? Sort of like it's part of both the profiles and everything else, right? So like there's this sort of, and again, because of safety, I mean, the whole safety thing. And even now, it's funny with COVID, right? So like there's all, I keep like sort of reading these articles, right? Dating in a time of COVID and all that. It's sort of like, it's very interesting, right? So like, it's always sort of the medical part always comes in, but
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious if maybe we want to explore a little bit of a solo practice people can do.
I was about to say that, right?
Okay, cool.
Let's take people on a little journey of practice. If everybody's game, let's learn, let's experience.
So I wanted to share something that you could take home or you're already home, everyone's home, but that you can that you can try out on your own. So this is something that you can do whether you're in a relationship or not in a relationship, because it's solo sex. It's about personal pleasure. And it's one of the first exercises that I like to introduce to people who are interested in bringing mindfulness and presence into their sex life. And it's mindful masturbation, or another way to put it is embodied self-pleasure. And so I just wanted to kind of share the basics of this exercise. And then, I encourage you to go give it a try and see how it works for you. And as with really anything that I suggested, they're all invitations. And then you get to find out, how does this fit into my personal exploration and my personal expression? So mindful masturbation is, the basic version is simple, and it's kind of bare bones. So you'll put aside any toys, any porn, any fantasy, not because I have issue with any of those things at all, but just because for this exercise, you leave them out. They're just not part of it. The idea is that it's just you and your body. And you'll create a really comfortable space for yourself. It could be your bed, it could be, the couch, it could be blankets and pillows on the floor. And you set a timer, because it's actually a practice. It's not replacing your personal way of masturbation. It's just a practice to add to what you're already doing, a complement. And so you'll create this space and you'll set a timer for 10 or 15 minutes. And the exercise begins by just exploring your body, not necessarily in a sexual way, not your genitals, but in a sensual way. And so you might stroke your face, or you might run your fingers through your hair, or you might pull your hair, or you might stroke your arm or scratch your arm. You just start exploring. You start exploring the body in new ways, right? So for most of us, we have a way that we masturbate, or we've had a few ways that we've masturbated throughout our lives, and that's kind of our thing. It's what we do. And this is a way to kind of bring in some possibility and some flexibility with what is pleasurable. It's also a way to get in touch with what we want and need. So when we're talking about sexual needs and being able to express them, it's good to know what feels good. Like, that's really helpful. And so you start exploring, like, where are my erogenous zones? Where are the areas that feel most pleasurable? What type of pressure do I like? And eventually, maybe you start to move to touching the genitals. And what I encourage you to do is don't go right to what you always do. Instead, explore this part of the body in a totally fresh new way. So I was at a Buddhist retreat, and the nuns said, go to sleep tonight like it's the first time you've ever gone to sleep. And so I will say, touch your genitals like it's the first time you're ever touching them, and let it be something brand new. The one thing I do include in the exercise, if you want it, is lube. And I'm a big fan. Have it handy. It might be fun. It might be helpful. It might feel good. And the goal of the exercise is not to climax. If you do, that's fine. If you don't, that's fine. The goal of this basic aspect of the exercise is to simply create pleasure in your body with your own hands and feel it. And each time you get pulled into your mind, each time you get pulled into, oh, this is weird and embarrassing, why am I doing this thing some lady told me to do on the internet, like, this is weird, like, just come back to your body, come back to pleasure. If you get pulled into insecurities, or you just find yourself kind of checking out a bit, just come back to your body. And that, in that way, it's a mindfulness practice. You're just returning to your object of focus, which in this instance is the pleasure in your body, and potentially the sexual pleasure in your body. And then when the timer goes off, I always like to have people do a little bit of writing. Like, it could be a few lines, it could be a few pages, just kind of like, it's another kind of meditation. Just let that out. Like, what was that experience for you? What came up for you? And then let's say you didn't climax and you really want to, then go for it and do it however you want, pull out whatever you want to do that with. And I would say do it like 3 times over a couple of weeks, and each time write a little bit so that you can kind of see where it goes, what the arc of the experience is. And this is really, really helpful when it comes to orgasm anxiety, which people of all genders get. It could be anxiety about orgasming too soon, or orgasming taking too long, or in a way that you think is embarrassing. Like, you get so caught in the mind that you're not enjoying all the pleasure associated with sex, and you're just sort of so hyper-focused on this one part of it that really only lasts a couple seconds. And this is a way to get some freedom from that anxiety in the mind and start to really get into the pleasure in the body. And it can be really life-changing just to take 15 minutes and spend time with your body in this way. So that's the basic exercise. And I don't know if you have questions or things to add, or if anybody who's joining us does. I'm happy to respond to that.
Yeah, I mean, write your questions or your thought about this. I think that somebody asked before about creativity. I think this exercise of exploring the body of pleasure, and really, quite importantly, to allow yourself pleasure. Right? To allow yourself 2 things. One is time. Mm-hmm. I'm going to take 15 minutes for myself, mm-hmm. by myself, for myself, mm-hmm. right? And I'm going to focus on pleasure, not productivity, not even like yoga or an exercise or mindfulness about the life and social justice and promoting compassion towards the world. That's great. That's awesome. Very Buddhist, super meta. I'm into it, but this is not it. This is for me. And I think so many people have such a hard time with that very small basic block, which is, you know, building block, which is sort of taking time for myself, for me, by myself, without anything else, right? And in that sense, without food, without a snack, without chocolate, like sort of just me, with just the way God has created me. And I think that's really, really important. And especially for in days that you do need or require more creativity, when you are able to channel that energy, right? Especially if you don't climax, right? So like the nature of Tantra is to say, okay, that energy now is in me. Can I pull it, right? I'm sitting at my desk. I have to think of a problem and creative ways for solving it or ways to write. Go back to that place.
Yep.
Right? Go back to that energy where you feel good, where you feel some pleasure, right? And allow it to then channel it, right? So like allow your mind to generate that excitement for newness.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, this starts to get into, you know, potentially more advanced versions of the exercise, but not necessarily. Anyone could try it any time, which is to tune in while you're working with a practice like this, to tune into what does that energy feel like? Right. Where do you feel it? How is it moving? Right. Is it hot? Is it cool? Is it vibrating? Is it undulating? And then that starts to allow you to actually channel it. There could be like a physical sense of like, now I'm going to take this movement that's happening in my body based on taking this 15 minutes for myself. And I'm going to, like you said, move it right into this art or into this Excel spreadsheet. It doesn't really matter. It's all creative, you know, and like using it in that way. Another thing that came to mind as you were speaking is this idea of how hard it is for us to take that time for ourselves, and something that can come up when we do, especially when we take time to be sensual and even sexual with ourselves, is we can come in contact with some of the stuff we started with at the beginning, the shame, the trauma, the anxiety. And I just like to say that it may be that your mindful masturbation practice one day is just to like hold yourself and just like put your arms around yourself and be like, oh, sweetheart, like I am right here with you. I love you. I love you. I'm right here. You're safe, right? Like that might be the mindful masturbation for the day. And that's great. That's okay. That's what's needed in the moment.
And that's important because, right? I think a lot of people, if you see, it's also sort of like in movies, but I think for a lot of people, noticing what do you do when you're stressed, right? Some people like, right, so play with their hair, some people stroke their beard, right? So like some people like what do you do, right? So like where are you in the body? Because I think a lot of it is okay, right? So like where is the work, right? And I think yes, both the self-hug or the sitting or the holding of the hand, right? So like it allows you to really sort of like connect and sort of think like, okay, this is the work. There's a great comment, right? If it's all about me and pleasure, where their spirituality comes in. So I guess first and foremost is that pleasure is the me, right? And therefore the me, right, is that part of the soul, right? So, but just I'm talking about just before, so like we open the thing, right? That there's what you communicate, right? We talk, we get dressed, right? We write, the work that we do, right? So like that is expressions of the self, right? The degrees we have, the books we've written, the things we have accomplished, the car we drive, right? These are all these kind of messages, right? These are communications. But what does your soul say? How does your spirit express itself? The way the spirit expresses itself is through mediums that you cannot use other ways to sort of to deal with, right? And that's why music and art, right, and all the passions, all the muses, all the passions comes through that soul. And those only are part of our expression when it is created. And creativity is an act of insemination. It's an act of germination. It's an act of of sustainability. It's an act of sex, right? It is a moment that we have to create something and produce something outside of ourselves. And that's where the spirituality comes in. Because if you're repressed, then it's very hard to express yourself. If you don't believe in your pleasure, and if you don't believe in yourself, it's very hard to express yourself, right? There's a great midrash, a great piece of work from within Jewish sources that says that it's a little sexist, but it is 3,000 years old. So but it says like Torah, right? Studying Torah, learning Torah is like the vagina of a young gazelle, of a young virgin, and it is tight and it is pleasurable. And Torah is like that. Like the same way that you enjoy going and having sex with a young gazelle, learning Torah, it's the same thing as that. It's pleasurable as if it was the first time. There is a certain, right, conquering, right, of Torah, right? There's a certain sort of like, right, the Torah is a mistress that demands you to find her secrets, right? And yeah, right. And in that sense, sort of like that's where the spirituality comes in. And it comes from studying Torah, as it comes from creating, as it comes from feeling good with yourself.
Yeah. Beautifully put. What a ride you just took me on. I loved it. I would also say that to me, spiritual as opposed to what? Like,
yes.
like, because I don't tend to use the word God to explain, but I can use it because I think we mean the same thing. I can say God, I can say universe. God is everything.
Right.
Am I awake to it? And again, that's why like you can absolutely have, whether it's a wild masturbation session or like, a one night stand with someone you're never going to see again, and have connection with God, because that person is God, because you are God, because this wave of pleasure is God, because this next breath is God, and so it's like, it's all about like, am I waking up to that or not? And we can, again, it's in us all to wake up to that.
Yeah. And like we said at the beginning, like we wouldn't be here without it, right? So like right, sex created us. And again, there's a great midrash in Jewish life that says that a person has three things have to come into partnerships to create a person: mom, dad, and God. Right? So there has to be these things, and we believe, right, so that our spirit and our existence are preordained in that sense, right? And yes, right, yes, just arising and passing the wave, absolutely, right? And pleasure, sex, creativity, writing, all of it is in the same ebb and flow, right? All of it is in sort of this arising and passing, right? It's never, we're too influenced by porn, right? Where we think it's like, come, bang, 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 great, like, like great ecstasy, and then we're done, right? You like the sound effects?
I love them. That's great.
But like, right? But it's, right, sort of like sex, like life, like creation, it can be awkward and banging of heads and laughter and pause and up and down, right? It's a lot more, a lot more human than it is.
Yeah. And then there's that which holds it all.
Yeah.
That is completely interconnected. I want to just say one other thing about the pleasure, the question about if it's all about me and pleasure, where does the spirituality come in? I just want to mention that, we, as a culture, there can be a sense of, and within religion, there can be a sense of, suffering being a really important part of it. And it is, like, learning, understanding suffering and being in contact with suffering, and this idea of being selfless. And so I think it's important for us to re-educate ourselves that pleasure and engaging with this human can absolutely be a part of our spiritual path as well. Like just as much as exploring suffering, just as much as being compassionate and selfless.
Absolutely. And I think, again, the only way to sort of really explore the others is first comes from the self, right? And a little bit like, what we were talking about before about your own trauma, right? Presumably, correct me if I'm wrong, but like, right, it also informs how you help other people with their trauma, right? But it comes from a very personal lens, right? It's not to say like, oh, I also, and therefore I understand, but like, right, so like, as always, our vulnerability, our pain, right, sort of like really helps us understand that we are all connected, right? Helps us understand that we are all part of the same human condition, right?
Absolutely. And being in touch with our pleasure works in a similar way, where it's like when we are moving from a place of embodied pleasure, when we're in the world coming from a place of embodied conscious pleasure, that's a really powerful thing to be modeling. It's a really powerful thing to be saying, hey, it's okay to feel good, even when things are going terribly in lots of ways. Like it's okay to feel good, and in fact, that can fuel you, that pleasure, that way of embodying pleasure, can fuel you to take positive change in your life, in the world, in your spiritual practice, all of these things.
Right. There's a question. Yeah, I saw somebody asked about the quote from Torah. So the midrash is from a rabbi called Rabbi Chaim Eliezer ben Yitzchak from Vienna, and he wrote a book called Or Zarua, right? So like the seeded light, and the quote is from there. If you email me, I can send you the direct quote, but that's where the quote from the Gazelle of Torah comes from. So just to answer that.
I love that you brought that quote up. It's like, it's very edgy to say what you just said, and I'm used to being the person that's saying the thing, so it's really nice to be with someone who's just like, I'm going to talk about it. I'm going to talk about it
by a rabbi, Jessica. I just want to not.
I love it.
Bragging rights, but
That makes me so happy.
It's funny. The funny thing is, back in LA, every once in a while, usually it's a fundraiser, is a fun fundraiser. I teach a class. It's an evening class called Talmud After Dark, which is sort of like all the different elements. And I think even there's even people on this that sort of have been to them. And it's really sort of like looking at the kind of underbelly and the sort of the edgy, and looking really at sex and sexuality that sort of like appears in our tradition, because there's a lot, right? The Talmud, beautiful as it is a book of halacha, of law, of code, of spirituality, of deep learning, of mysticism, and it's supposed to, and it's designed to describe the entire life, from how to wear your shoes, to what you eat, to what you do, but also to how to speak to your life and how to make love, and right, and what about anal sex, and what about a woman who is pleasured or who is not pleasured, and prostitutes and whores and everything, right? And one of my favorite characters in Talmud is this prostitute. Her name is Chavuta, right? She's a prostitute. Her name is Liberty, right? And that is, I think, the beauty of why I'm involved in these conversations for us, is that I don't want to shy away from things that people think that we don't talk about, because that translates into everything else. That translates into recovery, that translates into the addiction, pain, right? So like all the things that we want to, money that we try to avoid, and I'm not into that. Mm-hmm. If we were to bring redemption, if I'm going to bring redemption to the world, I want it because we're honest and because we're vulnerable. And there's no topic that doesn't have spirituality in it, because that's part of the human condition. We bring ourselves, and that's what connects us.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Yes.
Yeah. So we have about we have about I don't know, like 9 minutes left ish for this. So if people have questions specifically, again, I know people have been asking questions, which is great. If people have more questions, we're technically in the Q&A part of the seminar, so feel free. But otherwise, I'm like just gonna continue to talk a little bit about, I guess, sexual identity. I think a little bit, sort of, right, sort of. Oh, Claire Barberis Giletti raised your hand. Claire, do you want to write your question, or do you want me to invite you to microphone? I'm happy to invite you to the microphone. Let me allow you to talk. You can ask your question, Claire. Here. So I just asked you to unmute. You can unmute yourself, and you can come up on microphone and ask your question. Claire?
I think you're
Claire?
still muted, Claire.
Still muted. I think you're still muted. So you have to unmute yourself, and then you are allowed to talk. But if not, feel free to just to write it in and then think, or if you just hit it by mistake, that's also okay. We can continue.
And I'll say, as far as questions, like there's really not anything that's off limits. Like
right.
That's something that I think that's something we can both offer. But like it's like,
if you haven't made that clear right now.
Yeah.
So all right. Yeah.
No, go on.
I was like, so sexual identity in that sense, right? Because we both work with straight, gay, bi, trans, like, right? So like whatever is on the spectrum, however people decide to define themselves. So I don't know if like you have any sort of insight into sort of like what that sort of looks like, or the work that you do in terms of not just the sort of the pleasure and the sexuality and spirituality, but also sort of like finding one's identity and being able to live with it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think a lot of what we've been talking about, this idea of being able to be truthful, being able to be authentic, talking about the things that we don't talk about, the more that is nurtured, the easier it is for people to arrive to a place of acceptance with who they are. I've had the privilege of working with a number of people who, during our work together, came to realize that they were non-binary or they were trans, and to see that process, like to see how the spiritual path and the path to conscious, mindful sex can midwife a full expression of oneself is really beautiful. And so I would say, if that's something, if you're struggling with that, like if that's something you're struggling with, rather than trying to like force yourself to like, I got to make a decision and I got to figure this out and come out and be this one specific thing, like invite the mystery and the curiosity into that part of your life. Like really let that be part of the process, and also be really willing to go into the healing that often needs to be done, that's come from your childhood or from our culture or whatever it is, and know that you absolutely get to be you. Right. And you are absolutely lovable as you. And that includes if you're not ready to be like in your full expression of your sexual identity. That's okay too. There can be a sort of emphasis on like coming out and like, this is me. And sometimes that's not the right thing for everyone. And so to trust that process and to trust yourself and to really be leading with a sense of self-love and, again, consent with yourself.
Right. And to say this sort of, right, also I think that sort of while the world keeps pressuring us sort of to say something about yourself, to also say like, I don't know, and you can change your mind, right? Just because, right, you decide that you want to explore, let's say, bisexualism, doesn't mean that that's it, right? You may end up having one life partner that is sort of like, if you're a woman, let's say that there's a man and everybody thinks you're straight, and that's okay, right? So like, right, you don't owe anything to anyone, and you can identify. And also, just because you identify doesn't mean you have to explore all the different options.
That's right. Yeah, you can be polyamorous and never practice non-monogamy, but know that that's a possibility for you. Like it's it's really like so much of the look there is, and for in this country we have, you know, freedoms that maybe certainly in other countries we don't, and then there's certain ways in certain parts of this country where it's a little more tricky, but like ultimately you get to be you in whatever that looks like day to day. And I love that you said like you don't have to like make some decision. And it can be tempting to be like, I'm this.
Right.
Like when I was whatever I was 21 or something, I was like, I'm a lesbian. Right. And I knew when I said it, even I was like, it's not really quite true. And pretty quickly I started backpedaling, like, well, I mean, I love being with women, but I also love being with men. But like, you know, and I didn't need, you know, you don't need to do that. Sometimes it can feel good to be like, plant your flag, but you don't have to.
Right, absolutely. And I think that's important, because I think so many people get stuck in it, right? And they don't. And again, it's about exploration. We have just a few minutes. Jessica, if people want to find you or do the work or do some work with you, what are the best ways to sort of to find you, explore things with you? You know, yes.
So you can find me at yourwildawakening.com or on Instagram, which it's Jessica Clark Graham on Instagram. Get my full hippie parents' name there. And yeah, and you know, on Facebook, feel free to reach out. I have an event coming up on the 20th of this month. It's a Sunday morning. It's called Seen and Loved. It's a 2-hour virtual gathering for connection and support. And I actually forgot to put it up on my website, but it'll be up there, or, you know, I'm posting about it. You can contact me if you want the information. It's a donation-based, you know, group for meditation and some one-on-one support within the group. And then I do coaching with couples and individuals, and happy to share more about that if you reach out to me through my website.
Good. That's great. That's great. And also her book, Good Sex. You should read it. Absolutely. 100%. For us, right, so like, you know, to find us, shuvacenter.org, which is probably how you find us here, or through our groups, where we have Rosh Hashanah services coming up a week from Saturday, which will be really cool, with Rabbi Mark Vorovitz is coming, Harriet Rossetto, Tova Leibovitz Douglas, sort of like a lot of very cool, smart, interesting people. It's going to be alternative a little bit. We're going to pray a little bit and study together. So if you're looking for a Shoshana service, that's coming up. Tshuva group on Thursdays, of course, every Thursday at 5:30, which is a tool on how to live a better life and a life of meaning. And we're adding so many other groups. All these contacts are in our in the chat. Thank you, Jessica, for putting there. Oh, I see there was like one last question. How do you tell yourself something is just sex? And how do you tell yourself not to fall in love, and that if it's just sex and it's okay? As an addict, we are special. We go from hello to what color will we paint our first house, to just have sex creates more brokenness afterwards. The truth is, you don't have control over your emotions, right? You can catch emotions. But the way to really look at yourself is to always be mindful, from my opinion, and aware of what are you trying to get out of it, right? And to be honest with your partner. I would like to have a good time. I would like to do this, or I would like to do that. And when you do that and you set the boundaries, you're more likely than not to really honoring yourself, your needs, and your partners. And then feelings may or may not follow, but quite frankly, right, if you go into this and you fall in love, that says also something, right? That says something about where you are in life and what you really want. Right? It is not sex that creates brokenness, my friend. It is our attentionality. It is our mistrust. It is our lying. It is our cheating. It is our miscommunication. It is the not love of self that creates brokenness, right? It is when we're not whole with ourselves is that we break ourselves and others. Parting words, Jessica?
Yeah, just that it is okay to just want to have sex, and it is okay to want to have a partner and be in love. And it's also okay to be confused about those two and to need to get clarity. And the last thing I'll just say specifically, Jason, to you, based on your question, is that look at what pattern you're playing out from mom and dad in these relationships, because it may be that something that's happening is you're looking to recreate something so that it can be better this time, and you don't have to do that anymore, because you're good enough just as you are, and you're lovable just as you are, and it's not necessary to take yourself through that anymore.
100%. See, Jason, everybody else, you're just okay the way you are. You're lovable the way you are. This is right, sort of Jessica's and my gift to you. You are good as you are. Absolutely. You matter. Thank you for coming. Jessica, thank you everybody else for joining us. This has been a real great pleasure for me and for all of us to learn. As always, you can sort of like send us questions. You know how to find us, DM us. This is really amazing. Thank you. I hope everybody has a very pleasurable evening. Perhaps you should go and try Jessica's, right? So like practice. Tell us how it went. No, actually, don't tell us how it went. It's fine.
There's a YouTube video giving you the instructions on my YouTube channel, which you can get through my website. So if you need a refresher, it's there.
Right. There you go. Thanks, everybody. If I don't speak to all of you, Shana Tova, have a good, happy new Jewish year. Jessica, as always, thank you. We will talk soon, of course.
Yes.
Thanks, everybody else. We'll leave the chat open for a couple minutes for people to Zoom chat in, but otherwise, we're done for the evening. Thanks again. Have a good weekend. Shabbat Shalom.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.